platform, sneakers, all the boys want a picture. Two foreign cars, I make rich look richer. Save your breath, baby, I'm not going home with ya. Mini skirt on, take my body in glitter. Platform.
Welcome back to the Neck Deep Podcast with Christy and Bailey. If you are listening to this on Spotify or another platform, you might be wondering, who is Bailey? Well, Bailey is the executive producer of this podcast. He also happens to be covered in feathers and has the feet of a lizard. He's an African gray parrot that I inherited from my mother-in-law, and he's now kind of become my little side man, I guess you could say. And makes an appearance in most all of my content. Before we get started, I would like to give a great big shout out to the sponsor of this podcast. Just kidding, I'm not sponsored. But Bailey's laughing. What I would like to do is give a great big shout out to all of my channel members on YouTube. You guys are the sponsor of this video and currently all of my videos. I appreciate you all so much, and if you are interested in becoming a channel member, I will leave that information in the description below. Before I get into today's topic, I want to have a little disclaimer inserted here. We're going to be talking about something that is a little bit touchy and sensitive for some people, and please understand this is in no way meant to attack anyone. These are my own opinions that I am expressing, formed on my own personal experiences. And that is the goal of this podcast, is to just have this conversation. You are welcome to put a comment with your input. I just ask that you keep it respectful. And with all of that said, let's get into it. So one of my family's absolute favorite shows is Young Sheldon. We love that show, and my kids all poke fun and they call me Meemaw, which is played by Annie Potts, and I love her character, so I'm perfectly happy being Meemaw. But there was an episode of Young Sheldon that we watched that triggered all these memories from my past that I had not even thought about in years, and I wanted to talk about it. But there was an episode that aired where they put Mary, Sheldon's mom, in charge of the Judgment House for that year, and I cannot remember what she referred to it in the show. I don't think it was called a Judgment House, but here in the South where I'm from, in Alabama, they were referred to as judgment houses. Some people know what they are, but a lot of people have never heard the term, and so I'm going to start by explaining what a judgment house is, and then talk a little bit about my memories and experiences and how I feel about them now. So if you've listened to my previous podcast, then you know that I am no longer a Christian. I consider myself a humanist, or you could say agnostic atheist, whatever term you want to use. I don't really care. I'm not a practicing Christian. But so a judgment house, and this is coming from Google. The definition here, well, this isn't a definition, but a write-up explaining what a judgment house is. It says, a Halloween time feature at evangelical churches all over the country. Judgment House aims to spook visitors as other haunted houses do during this time of year, but Judgment House aims to scare people for the sake of heaven. So these were a really big thing in my area back in like the late 90s, early 2000s when I was a teenager. And every Halloween, multiple churches in the area would put on a judgment house. And in my experience, they came in two forms. You had the walkthrough kind, where you would walk room to room and see different scenes. And then there was another like bigger church in our area. They just did it in the auditorium. They put on a big production, so you stayed seated, but they would act out different scenes. It was the same thing, just a little bit different presentation. So typically what would happen is, like in my experience, we would go as a youth group from another church. I went to a very small Southern Baptist church, but we were a very close-knit youth group. And let me just say this, I have very fond memories of being in the youth group at church. The people that were in there with me, most of them don't speak to me now that I'm not part of Christianity anymore, but I have strong opinions, but I do have fond memories of the relationships and the fun we had and the bonding and all of that. So let me just put that in there. But we would go as a youth group to different churches putting on judgment houses or whatever they were calling them. Typically you would go into like the first room and there would be like a narrator or like a tour guide type person who would read like a script, and there would be some kind of a story. And so you would go into like your first room. They might act out a scene of, let's just say, teenagers drinking at a party, and you would have all these actors. You might have a script read, and I'll say they did a very good job based on what I remember. Like, the production quality was pretty good. It was entertaining, but which it was designed to be manipulative, and it was. So the first scene could be like a bunch of teenagers at a party, and maybe they were drinking, and then they would shut the lights out and you would go to the next room and there might be a scene of teenagers. I mean, nobody was actually having sex, obviously, but they might kind of allude to teenagers being promiscuous, and I can't remember specifics. There may have even been like an insinuated rape type thing. I'm not sure, so don't like go bonkers about that because I don't remember the specifics. And this, of course, was the perfect setup for the next scene because it would result in a pregnancy. So one of the things that I remember the most, and why I wanted to talk about this, one of the judgment houses that I personally went to, there was an abortion scene. So there was teenagers partying, and then there was insinuated promiscuity that resulted in a pregnancy. And now here we are in the next scene at a medical clinic getting an abortion. And what I remember is walking into the room, and there was a girl laying on a table with her knees up, but there was a drape, so you couldn't see anything. You could just, and I think she had on a hospital gown, but it was very obvious she was at a gynecologist's office by the way her knees were up and all of this. And I don't remember the script or the acting or anything, but what I remember about the abortion procedure was the sound of a very, like, they would turn on, I don't know if it was like a soundboard or an actual like shop vacuum cleaner, but there was, when it was time for the actual procedure, the girl would scream, they would turn on the loud vacuum cleaner, and they would shut the lights out, and the scene would end, and you were left like feeling like you just witnessed somebody ripping a baby apart in pieces. And we know now that that is not at all how abortions happen, and there is a lot of misinformation about abortions, which I would be happy to talk about at some point, but that's getting on another subject. But then there was usually some kind of a car crash scene where you had fatalities. And then there would always be a scene of like someone who was a very friendly person who maybe worked with the homeless, who spent their life volunteering, maybe even going to church. But this person had never accepted Jesus Christ as their savior. So when this family person that everybody loved passed away suddenly, and they enacted the scene of going up to the pearly gates and seeing if their name was written in the book of life, this person would be cast into hell because they didn't accept Jesus Christ as their personal savior. It did not matter how they lived their life. Their name was not written in the book of life, and they would get cast into hell. And then there would be this horrible scene of Satan and loud noise, darkness, strobe lights, very theatrical, like screaming in the background. They would even have like voice changers to make the voice even more scary. And then after that, once somebody would go to heaven, and they would have a scene about being in heaven, and of course there was emotional music, and everything was white and gold, and so kind of like if you ever had a massage, it was just very serene, very peaceful and beautiful. And then after that, there would be counselors waiting for you, and sometimes they wouldn't even wait for you to want to talk to them. They would come up to you and they would say, you know, where are you going when you die? Are you going to heaven or hell? And it was very normal back then. And I think that's what strikes me the most now, is how absurd it all is in retrospect. But back then it was so common, it was so ingrained into our culture, and I honestly thought nothing about it, and I wasn't around anyone who thought anything about it. But now, all these years later, when I saw that episode of Young Sheldon, I started thinking back on these productions. It rocked my world, so to speak, because I just cannot fathom in what universe that's okay. Now it makes me angry, and I would let my kids are 17 and 18, so I wouldn't have a problem with them going to one now, because they don't have the religious goggles on. They would be able to differentiate. They would recognize that this is manipulative. But anyways, as a parent, I would not let my kids experience that. I remember the way it made me feel. It made me feel anxiety. Growing up as a Southern Baptist, I feel like I was in a constant state of anxiety, because you're taught that, you're not good enough the way you are. You're a sinner. We're not worthy. And so you spend your whole life desperately trying to be a good Christian, but no matter how hard you try, it's never going to be good enough. And I lived in a constant state of worry. I have accepted Jesus and I believe it, but is that enough? Did I really, truly get saved, or did I just think I did? I'm not really sure, so I'm going to pray really hard again. And so I can remember just constantly questioning myself, and am I sure that I'm sure, without a doubt? And then I would think, well, nothing's 100%, but I'm pretty sure. But then you would hear the preacher say, that's not good enough. You have to know. And then it was just this constant vicious cycle of, I thought I think I am, but now I'm doubting. And what if I die on the way home? I'm in a car crash. Am I going to go to heaven? I don't know. And now I'm so confused and I have all this anxiety. That's not okay. That is not, as an adult now and as a parent, that is so not okay in my book. You may be okay with it. That's your prerogative. I am not. And to be quite honest, I'm a little bit angry about it, because that was a lot of unnecessary anxiety on a child. That's manipulation. That is emotional manipulation at its finest. That is using scare tactics to attempt to control behavior in the name of religion. That's not okay. If you are following a religion because you are scared to go to hell, you're not following for the right reasons. Again, you may have a different opinion. That's okay. These are my opinions. I know that judgment houses are still a thing only because I did a little bit of Googling before I filmed this podcast. I also typed in judgment house on YouTube, but there were quite a few videos, but I didn't watch any of them. Number one, because I don't want to give those churches any views. But if you have not experienced one for yourself, you could always watch one of those, see what I'm talking about. They all have different scripts. There's even this one church that makes money selling different scripts for judgment houses for other churches, but it's just all very scammy and dirty to me. It feels icky. It feels manipulative. It doesn't feel right. And if you find yourself on the opposite side of the fence on this issue, I would implore you to really try to take a step back and think about this situation not in your mindset of Christianity, but just as a rational, logical person, and see if that changes your perspective at all. I mean, it probably won't, but this is just how I honestly feel about it. I think it's outrageous. I think it's manipulative. I think it's gross. I even had someone, I won't say who, tell my child when she was very young that she would not see me when she died in heaven because I was going to go to hell. I'm not going to say who told my child this, but it caused issues in our relationship and was a big problem. I didn't know that this had happened until much later when we were driving in the car somewhere, and all of a sudden my daughter, who was like 5 or 6 at the time, just started hysterically crying. And I was like, I had to pull over, and I'm like, Carly, what's wrong? And she was sobbing, like could not form words. She was sobbing so hard. And that's when she told me, so and so says, when you die and I die, I won't see you in heaven because you'll be in hell. And to hear that, if I was having a one-on-one conversation with you, you would say, oh my gosh, that's horrible. Who would do such a thing? But some of the same people that would say that are also going to church every Sunday, and this is what you're also being told. And after that, I told this person that she would not be allowed to go to church with them anymore if this was like, no. And I could be wrong, but I don't think she ever did go back to church with that person, which is sad because it was quality time for them, and I don't have a problem with that. I encourage my kids to learn all they can about many different religions, read the Bible, read the Quran, read all of this on your own. And it's like with the news. Anytime, on the rare occasion that I watch the news, if I, let's say, see something on CNN, I'll flip the TV over to Fox and see what their spin is. And same thing when I see something online. I look at what's the source. If the source is Washington Post or New York Times, whatever, I will always go, if it's something I'm interested in, I will go and look at the other side and see what their spin on it, and see what their spin is on it, and kind of form my own opinions from there. That, in a nutshell, is judgment houses. My opinion on them, I think they are gross and manipulative, and I totally understand the people who think it's completely normal, because I also used to think it was completely normal and thought nothing of it until many, many years later. So let me know in the comments, if you're seeing this on YouTube, let me know in the comments, have you heard of a judgment house before? Have you been to one? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I don't yet know what my next podcast will be about. I do have a lot of stuff going on. I am getting ready to speak at a Trauma Survivors Network event next week, so I've got to write that speech. And then my daughter has graduation, and then I will be flying to Daytona for a couple of days. Life is busy, but good for the most part. But that is a whole different podcast on how I feel emotionally exhausted every day because of the juxtaposition that is my life, which I can elaborate on another time on another podcast. Bailey and I would like to say thank you for being here and listening to this podcast. I will see you very soon. They all had their own little nuances, but they were mostly the same as far as they would put on it. Close to my eyeball, dude. I have stuff on my teeth. What was I saying?